Lieutenant Commander Ava Reyes stepped off the transport plane onto the tarmac at Naval Air Station Lemoore, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The California sun was bright, the air smelled of jet fuel, and the hangar ahead buzzed with the noise of engines being tested. She had waited years for a posting like this. She had trained harder than almost anyone she knew to earn it. But the moment she walked through the hangar doors, she felt every eye in the room land on her at once, and she knew instantly that earning the posting and being accepted by it were two very different things. She was the newest addition to Strike Fighter Squadron 41. She was also the only woman in a ready room that held 22 pilots, most of whom had already decided who she was before she said a single word. The whispers started before she had even finished signing her paperwork at the front desk. She heard fragments of sentences, meant to be quiet, but weren't quiet enough. Diversity hire, political posting. Let's see how long she lasts. She kept her face calm. She had heard worse in flight school. She had heard worse from instructors who doubted her, from classmates who assumed she was there to fill a quota rather than to fly. She had learned, slowly and the hard way, that the best response to doubt was silence, followed by proof. Commander Jake Holloway, the squadron's executive officer, did not bother lowering his voice at all. He stood near the briefing board with his arms crossed, watching her walk in, and said it loud enough for the entire room to hear. "We'll see if the paperwork matches the pilot." A few pilots chuckled. Others looked down at their boots, uncomfortable but silent. Ava set her duffel bag down slowly, met his eyes for just a moment, and said nothing at all. She had learned a long time ago that the people who talked the loudest before takeoff were often the quietest after landing. She would let her flying speak for her, the way it always had. Her call sign had not been assigned yet. In the Navy, pilots did not arrive with call signs already attached to them like a name tag. Call signs were earned, given by the squadron after they had seen something worth naming. For the first few weeks, the squadron guessed at things to call her instead, and none of it was kind. Barbie, Rookie, Quota. She heard the names spoken behind her back in the locker room, muttered over coffee in the break room, tossed around like something she was supposed to notice and shrink from. None of it stuck to her, because none of it touched who she actually was. Every morning, she arrived before most of the squadron and left after almost everyone else had gone home. She studied flight manuals until the words blurred. She ran extra hours in the simulator, practicing emergency procedures, until her hands moved through them without thinking. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was always about the mission, never about herself. Slowly, some of the newer pilots began to notice that she never missed a briefing detail, never showed up late, and never made an excuse when something went wrong. But Holloway's opinion of her, and the opinion of a few pilots who followed his lead, did not change no matter how hard she worked. 3 weeks after she arrived, the squadron was assigned to support a joint training exercise alongside a visiting Navy SEAL platoon. The exercise involved high-value extraction drills off the coast, with the fighter squadron providing air support and overwatch, while the SEAL team practiced getting a simulated asset out of hostile terrain. To most of the pilots, it sounded routine, just another training day, another box to check before the quarter ended. Nobody expected the day to become anything more than practice. Ava was assigned a support role, not the lead position. She did not complain. She simply prepared the way she prepared for everything, checking every detail of her aircraft twice, reviewing the weather reports 3 separate times, and going over the extraction team's expected positions until she could picture the coastline with her eyes closed. The exercise began normally enough. Fighter jets took position in the sky above the training zone, while the SEAL team moved through the terrain below, practicing their approach toward the extraction point. For the first hour, everything unfolded exactly as planned. Then the weather changed. A storm system that had been expected to stay far offshore suddenly shifted direction, moving in faster than any forecast had predicted. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, swallowing the clear sky within minutes. Wind speeds climbed, visibility began to drop. What had been a calm training exercise became something far more dangerous within the span of 20 minutes. At almost the same moment, the extraction team's contingency plan activated for real. What had been scripted as a simulated equipment failure during the drill suddenly became an actual mechanical fault in the team's ground transport. Two SEAL operators found themselves stranded on the coastline, their vehicle disabled, the weather worsening around them, and their communications beginning to degrade as the storm interfered with their signal. What had started as a training exercise had become a real emergency. Back at the base, the mood in the command center shifted instantly. Officers who had been relaxed moments earlier were suddenly leaning over radios, calling out coordinates, trying to get a clear picture of the situation. A rescue helicopter was scrambled to retrieve the stranded operators, but with the storm closing in and visibility dropping fast, the helicopter crew needed someone above the weather to guide them safely to the exact location. Someone needed to hold position over the stranded team, track the worsening conditions, and talk the rescue bird in through what was quickly becoming a wall of clouds and rain. Commander Holloway, who would normally have been the first pilot called for a mission like this, was grounded. His aircraft had a scratched canopy from an earlier taxiing incident, and it was not cleared to fly. Two other senior pilots were out of position, too far from the coastline to reach the stranded team in time. The squadron leadership scanned the room, running through their options, and found there really was only one pilot both close enough and ready enough to go. Ava was already suited up. She had finished her portion of the exercise early and had stayed near her aircraft, going over the weather reports one more time out of habit. When the call came through, she did not hesitate. She climbed into her cockpit, ran her checks with the same careful precision she always used, and lifted off into weather that had already grounded every other aircraft in the squadron. The storm was worse than anyone on the ground could have guessed from the radar alone. Wind buffeted her aircraft as she climbed, and rain streaked across her canopy faster than it could clear. Somewhere ahead of her, two storm cells had merged into a shape that should not have left any safe path through at all. But she had spent years training for exactly this kind of moment, the kind where the safe path does not exist, and you have to find one anyway. She found a narrow corridor between the two storm cells, a gap that existed for only a few minutes before the cells would likely close in on each other completely. She flew through it, holding her aircraft steady against wind that tried to push her off course every second. On the other side, she dropped into position directly above the stranded team's coordinates and held station there, circling steadily, despite the wind trying to shove her aircraft in every direction. For 11 minutes, she stayed exactly where she needed to be. She called out wind shear readings to the rescue helicopter crew as they approached, warning them each time a dangerous gust was about to hit. She marked hazards on the terrain below, spotting debris and unstable ground that the helicopter crew could not see through the rain. When the helicopter's own instruments began struggling in the storm, she talked the pilot in by voice alone, describing the exact path to take, the altitude to hold, and the moment to begin their final approach toward the stranded operators. Her voice never wavered. She spoke the way she always did during difficult moments, calm and precise, giving exactly the information needed and nothing more. Down below, the two stranded SEAL operators heard the helicopter approaching through the storm and knew, from the steady stream of guidance being called over the radio, that someone above the clouds was making sure they were not forgotten. The helicopter reached them. The extraction happened without further incident. Both operators were lifted safely off the coastline and flown back to base, arriving wet, cold, and shaken, but entirely unharmed. Ava held her position a few minutes longer, watching the helicopter clear the area before she turned her own aircraft back toward the base. She landed the way she always landed, smoothly and without any unnecessary radio chatter, taxied to her spot, and shut down her engine. She climbed out of the cockpit, removed her helmet, and walked back toward the hangar as though she had just finished an ordinary training flight rather than a rescue through weather that had grounded everyone else in her squadron. The following morning, the squadron gathered for a debrief on the previous day's exercise. The mood in the room was different than it had been in weeks. Word had already spread about the storm, the rescue, and the pilot who had flown when no one else could. Even so, most of the pilots who had mocked her for weeks were quiet, unsure exactly how to react to what had happened. Master Chief Daniel Voss, the SEAL platoon commander, walked into the debrief room himself. He was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen more than most people in the room could imagine. He had reviewed the flight recording from the previous day before arriving, watching the entire rescue unfold from the cockpit's perspective, listening to every call made during those 11 minutes over the coastline. He stood at the front of the room and asked a simple question. Who was flying cover during the extraction? Someone in the back of the room answered quietly, almost hesitantly. It was the new pilot, the one they had been calling Quota. Voss did not laugh. He did not smile. He stood there for a long moment, looking around the room at the pilots who had spent weeks doubting her, and something in his expression made the entire room go still. I want to know her call sign, he said. There was an awkward pause. Someone finally admitted that she did not have one yet, that the squadron had not officially given her one, that the names used around her so far had only ever been mocking nicknames muttered behind her back. Voss turned and looked directly at Ava, who stood near the side of the room, saying nothing, the way she always did in moments like this. Then I'll give her one, he said. He said it right there, in front of the entire squadron that had spent 3 weeks trying to make her feel small, in front of Commander Holloway, who stood near the back of the room with his scratched canopy report still in his hand from the day before. Widowmaker, Voss said, because anyone who bets against her is finished. The room went completely silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. The pilots who had called her names for weeks stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Holloway said nothing at all, his earlier words about paperwork and pilots suddenly feeling very small in the space of that silence. Ava simply nodded once, the same calm expression on her face that she had worn since the day she arrived. She picked up her helmet from the table beside her, thanked Voss quietly for his words, and walked out of the room to prepare for her next scheduled flight, exactly as she would have on any other day. She never brought up that moment again. She did not need to. From that day forward, the squadron did it for her. Whenever a new pilot arrived and asked why the quietest flyer in the squadron carried a call sign that a Navy SEAL commander had given her personally, in front of everyone, someone would tell the story of the storm, the stranded operators, and the 11 minutes she held her position when no one else could. The mockery stopped completely after that day, not because anyone forced it to stop, but because there was simply nothing left to mock. She had answered every doubt the only way she ever intended to, not with words, but with 11 minutes of steady flying through weather that had grounded everyone who once doubted her. And every time her call sign was spoken aloud in that squadron afterward, it was never said as a joke again. It was said the way Voss had said it that morning, with quiet respect, the kind that is only ever earned and never given for free.